Welcome, friends. Today I'm going to tell you a story about love, betrayal, and unexpected blessings in life. Enjoy the story. Tammy sat on a bench in Central Park, watching children play on the colorful jungle gym. Their laughter and squeals of delight filled the air. But for Tammy, the joyous sounds only served to deepen the ache in her heart. Despite being married to Keith for 7 long years, she had been unable to conceive a child of her own. As a successful businesswoman, Tammy had always prided herself on her ability to overcome any obstacle. But this was one challenge that money and power couldn't solve. She felt like a failure, and the guilt that gnawed at her insides was only made worse by the nagging suspicion that Keith blamed her for their inability to start a family. Tammy sighed, her eyes misting over with unshed tears. She loved Keith with all her heart, but lately it seemed like they were drifting apart. He was always working late, always too busy to spend time with her. And when they were together, there was a distance between them, an unspoken tension that Tammy couldn't quite put her finger on. She shook her head, trying to dispel the dark thoughts that clouded her mind. Today was supposed to be her day off, a chance to relax and recharge after months of grueling work. She wouldn't let her personal troubles ruin it. Just as she was about to get up and head home, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Julia, her assistant. "Tammy, I'm so sorry to bother you on your day off," Julia said, her voice tinged with anxiety. "But we have a bit of an emergency at the office. The rental agreement for the new property fell through, and we need you to bring the backup copy from your in-laws' house." Tammy sighed, rubbing her temples. "Can't it wait until tomorrow, Julia? I really need this day off." "I know, Tammy, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent," Julia replied, her tone apologetic. "But if we don't get this agreement signed today, we could lose the property altogether." Tammy closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "Okay, fine. I'll go to Ellen and Michael's house and get the document. But after that, I'm taking the rest of the day off, no exceptions." "Of course, Tammy. Thank you so much." Tammy hung up the phone, feeling a twinge of annoyance. It seemed like even on her day off, work always found a way to intrude. Tammy pulled up to her in-laws' sprawling mansion, her sleek BMW looking out of place among the manicured lawns and pristine gardens. She had always felt a bit uncomfortable around Keith's parents, with their old money attitudes and their not-so-subtle digs at her humble upbringing. But today, as she walked up the marble steps to the front door, she felt a sense of unease that went beyond the usual awkwardness. Something wasn't right, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. She rang the doorbell, and after a few moments, Ellen answered, her perfectly coiffed hair and immaculate makeup belying the coldness in her eyes. "Tammy, darling, what a surprise," Ellen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What brings you here on this lovely day?" Tammy forced a smile, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her gut. "I just need to pick up a document from Keith's old room, Ellen. It's for work." Ellen's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, dear. Come on in." Tammy followed Ellen into the house, her heels clicking on the polished marble floors. As they passed the living room, she heard voices coming from behind the closed doors. "I'm telling you, Michael, it's the perfect plan," a woman's voice said, and Tammy's heart skipped a beat. She knew that voice all too well. It was Lucy, Keith's secretary. "But what about Tammy?" Michael's voice was muffled, but Tammy could hear the hesitation in his tone. "She's been a good wife to Keith and a valuable asset to the company." "Oh, please," Lucy scoffed. "Tammy's nothing but a barren workaholic shrew. Keith deserves better than that. He deserves someone who can give him a child, someone who can make him happy." Tammy felt like she had been punched in the gut. She leaned against the wall, her head spinning with shock and betrayal. "And what about the company?" Michael asked, his voice rising with concern. "If Tammy finds out about this, she could ruin us." "That's where Keith comes in," Lucy replied, her tone smug. "He'll take over the company, and Tammy will be left with nothing. It's the perfect plan." Tammy's blood ran cold. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her own husband plotting behind her back to steal her company and leave her for his mistress? It was too much to bear. She stumbled back from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to get out of there, had to clear her head and figure out what to do. As she turned to leave, she nearly ran into Ellen, who was standing in the hallway with a knowing smirk on her face. "Leaving so soon, dear?" Ellen asked, her voice dripping with venom. "I thought you needed that document." Tammy shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She pushed past Ellen and ran out of the house, tears streaming down her face. Tammy sat in her car, her head in her hands as sobs racked her body. She had never felt so betrayed, so utterly alone. How could Keith do this to her, after all the years they had spent together, after all the love and support she had given him? A tap on the window startled her out of her thoughts. She looked up to see Eugene, her head of security, standing outside the car with a concerned look on his face. She rolled down the window, trying to compose herself. "Eugene, what are you doing here?" "I was driving by and saw your car parked outside," Eugene replied, his voice gentle. "Is everything okay, Tammy? You look upset." Tammy shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, Eugene, everything is not okay. I just found out that my husband is planning to leave me for his mistress and steal my company out from under me." Eugene's eyes widened with shock, then narrowed with anger. "That bastard," he growled, his fists clenching at his sides. "I always knew there was something off about him." Tammy sighed, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I just don't know what to do, Eugene. I feel so lost, so betrayed." Eugene's expression softened, and he reached through the window to take Tammy's hand in his. "You're not alone, Tammy. I'm here for you, and I always will be. We'll figure this out together, okay?" Tammy nodded, feeling a sudden rush of gratitude for Eugene's steady presence. He had always been there for her, always had her back, even when everyone else had let her down. "Thank you, Eugene," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "I don't know what I would do without you." Eugene smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You'll never have to find out, Tammy. I promise." Tammy sat in her lawyer's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she listened to the man in the expensive suit outline her options. "Based on what you've told me, Mrs. Jameson, I believe we have a strong case for divorce on the grounds of infidelity and fraud," the lawyer said, his voice crisp and professional. "We can also file an injunction to prevent your husband from accessing your company's assets or making any major business decisions without your consent." Tammy nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She had been worried that Keith and his parents would find a way to outsmart her, to leave her with nothing. But with Eugene's help, she had gathered enough evidence to prove their betrayal, and now she had the law on her side. "Thank you, Mr. Stevens," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I want to make sure that Keith and his mistress don't get a penny of my hard-earned money, and I want to protect my company from their greed and manipulation." Mr. Stevens nodded, making a note on his legal pad. "Of course, Mrs. Jameson. We'll do everything in our power to ensure that your assets and your business are secure." Tammy stood up, shaking the lawyer's hand. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Stevens. I know this won't be an easy fight, but I'm ready for it." As she walked out of the office, Eugene was waiting for her in the hallway, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "How did it go?" he asked, his eyes searching her face for any sign of distress. Tammy smiled, feeling a surge of confidence and determination. "It went well, Eugene. We have a plan, and we're going to make sure that Keith and his family don't get away with this." Eugene nodded, a proud smile spreading across his face. "That's my girl," he said, his voice warm with affection. "You're one of the strongest women I know, Tammy. You're going to come out of this on top, I know it." Tammy felt a blush creep up her cheeks at Eugene's praise. She had always admired his strength and loyalty, but lately she had started to see him in a different light. His muscular frame, his deep brown eyes, the way he always seemed to know just what to say to make her feel better. She shook her head, trying to push those thoughts aside. Now was not the time for romance, not when her whole world was falling apart around her. But as she walked out of the building with Eugene by her side, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for a new beginning, a chance for love and happiness after all. Tammy sat on the porch swing of Eugene's family home, watching the sun set over the rolling hills of the countryside. It had been 2 weeks since she had filed for divorce, and the stress and heartache of the proceedings had started to take their toll. Eugene had suggested that they get away for a few days, to clear their heads and recharge their batteries. Tammy had been hesitant at first, not wanting to leave her company in the hands of her assistants for too long. But as soon as they had arrived at Eugene's hometown, with its quaint main street and friendly faces, she had felt a sense of peace wash over her. Eugene's parents had welcomed her with open arms, treating her like a long-lost daughter. They had fed her homemade meals, showed her around the town, and made her feel more at home than she had in years. And then there was Eugene himself. Away from the pressures of work and the chaos of the city, he seemed more relaxed, more open. They had spent long hours talking and laughing, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for their futures. Tammy had always known that Eugene was handsome, but seeing him in his element, with the sun on his face and the wind in his hair, she was struck by just how gorgeous he really was. His muscles rippled under his tight t-shirt, and his eyes sparkled with a warmth and joy that made her heart skip a beat. She found herself drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before, a pull that was both physical and emotional. And as the days went by, she started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was something more between them than just friendship. One night, as they sat on the porch swing together, watching the stars come out, Eugene turned to her with a serious expression on his face. "Tammy, there's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "Something I've been wanting to say for a long time." Tammy's heart raced, her palms suddenly sweaty. "What is it, Eugene?" Eugene took a deep breath, his eyes locking with hers. "I'm in love with you, Tammy. I have been for years. I know you're going through a tough time right now, and I don't want to pressure you or make things harder for you. But I needed you to know how I feel, how much you mean to me." Tammy's breath caught in her throat, her eyes filling with tears. She had never expected to hear those words from Eugene, had never dared to hope that he might feel the same way she did. But as she looked into his eyes, saw the love and sincerity shining there, she knew that she couldn't deny her own feelings any longer. "Oh, Eugene," she whispered, reaching out to cup his face in her hands. "I love you too. I think I always have." And then his lips were on hers, warm and soft and perfect, and everything else faded away. The pain of her divorce, the betrayal of her husband, the uncertainty of her future, none of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was Eugene, and the love that had been growing between them all along, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Tammy sat at her desk, her head in her hands as a wave of nausea washed over her. She had been feeling off for weeks now, ever since she and Eugene had returned from their getaway to his hometown. At first, she had chalked it up to stress and exhaustion, the toll of the divorce proceedings, and the long hours she had been putting in at work. But as the days went by, and the nausea and fatigue only seemed to get worse, she started to wonder if there might be something more going on. A knock on her office door startled her out of her thoughts. She looked up to see Julia, her assistant, peeking her head in with a concerned expression on her face. "Tammy, are you okay?" Julia asked, her voice soft and worried. "You look really pale." Tammy forced a smile, trying to wave off Julia's concern. "I'm fine, Julia. Just a little tired, that's all." But as she stood up to walk over to the filing cabinet, a sudden wave of dizziness hit her, and she had to grab onto the edge of her desk to keep from falling over. Julia rushed over to her side, her eyes wide with alarm. "Tammy, you're not fine. You need to go see a doctor right now." Tammy shook her head, trying to protest. "I can't, Julia. I have too much work to do, and I can't afford to take any more time off." But Julia was having none of it. She grabbed Tammy's purse and coat and practically dragged her out of the office, insisting that she go to the hospital right away. A few hours later, Tammy sat in the doctor's office, her heart racing as she waited for the results of her blood test. She had a sinking feeling that she knew what was wrong, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. When the doctor finally came in, his face serious and concerned, Tammy felt her stomach drop. "Mrs. Jameson, I have some news for you," the doctor said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're pregnant." Tammy's head spun, her mouth falling open in shock. Pregnant? How could that be possible? She and Keith had been trying for years to conceive, with no success. And then it hit her. Eugene, their night together in his hometown. The passion and love that had exploded between them like fireworks. She felt a rush of joy and fear all at once, her hand instinctively going to her still flat stomach. She was going to be a mother, after all these years of longing and heartache. But how would Eugene react? Would he be happy, or would he feel trapped, burdened by a responsibility he hadn't asked for? Tammy took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She knew that she had to tell Eugene, had to be honest with him about this unexpected blessing. And as she walked out of the doctor's office, her head held high and her heart full of hope, she knew that no matter what happened, she would face it with courage and strength. Because she was Tammy Jameson, and she was a survivor. And with Eugene by her side and their child growing inside her, she knew that she could handle anything that life threw her way. Tammy stood in front of the full-length mirror, smoothing her hands over the soft white fabric of her wedding dress. She could hardly believe that this day had finally come, that after all the heartache and pain of the past year, she was finally getting her happily ever after. Eugene stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes shining with love and pride as he gazed at her reflection. "You look beautiful, Tammy," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "I can't believe I get to call you my wife." Tammy smiled, leaning back into his embrace. "And I can't believe I get to call you my husband," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "After everything we've been through, after all the obstacles we've faced, I never thought I would find a love like this." Eugene turned her around to face him, his hands cupping her face gently. "I've loved you for so long, Tammy," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Even when I thought I couldn't have you, even when I had to watch you with someone else, I never stopped loving you." Tammy felt tears spring to her eyes, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "I know, Eugene, and I'm so sorry for all the time we wasted, for all the years we spent apart. But I promise you, from this day forward, I will spend every moment showing you how much I love you, how much you mean to me." Eugene smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'll hold you to that, Mrs. Thompson," he teased, his voice playful. "Starting with our honeymoon. 2 weeks of nothing but sun, sand, and each other." Tammy laughed, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "I can't wait," she said, leaning in to kiss him softly. "But first, we have a wedding to get to. Our friends and family are waiting for us." Hand in hand, they walked out of the room and down the aisle, their faces glowing with happiness and love. As they exchanged their vows, their eyes locked on each other, Tammy felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that their journey hadn't been an easy one, that they had faced more than their fair share of trials and tribulations. But she also knew that every moment, every heartache and every joy had been worth it, because it had led them to this moment, to this love. And as they were pronounced husband and wife, as Eugene swept her into his arms and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness in his heart, Tammy knew that she had finally found her true happiness, her true home. In the months that followed, as her belly grew round with their child, as they settled into their new life together, Tammy marveled at how far she had come, how much she had changed. She was no longer the lonely, heartbroken woman she had been a year ago, no longer the workaholic who put her career above all else. She was a wife, a mother, a woman who knew her own worth and her own strength. And every night, as she lay in Eugene's arms, their child kicking gently inside her, she thanked the universe for the unexpected blessings that had come her way, for the love that had healed her heart and given her a new lease on life. Because she knew, with a certainty that came from deep within her soul, that this was where she was meant to be, that this was the life she was always meant to live. And as she looked into Eugene's eyes, saw the love and devotion shining there, she knew that no matter what the future held, no matter what challenges or joys lay ahead, they would face it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, forever and always, until the end of time.